what are our core values as a family and what's going to be important to us and what are we going to protect as a family. I think that's where we all should start. Right. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about as we go through this discussion can filter through that and then look back and go, okay, then that's how I would make that decision based on my core values and what we're about as a family and what maybe my child has relayed that's pretty important to them based on their age as we're developing them into that. And I think that is what kind of this discussion is about. How are we developing our children through sport to be men and women that can be successful in whatever it is God has for them down the road? And I do think it starts with core value as an individual and as a family.
Welcome to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast, where we explore leadership principles through the lens of the beautiful game.
Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. I'm Phil Darke, your host, and with me is my brother, Paul Jobson. Paul, how you doing?
Phil, doing great, man. Great to be back on the pod once again with you and with our listeners, our loyal listeners. Yeah, man, things are going pretty well. We are ramping up for Spring Warrior Way, so all the details are falling in place right now for that. We've got we consistently have around 200 kids for that, and again, we're going to probably exceed that this season. So we're excited about what God's doing through that program, and we've got over 30 people already signed up and ready to go to Guatemala this summer too. So we're just really excited about what's going on there, and boys are in and out of sports. My oldest just finished. They won their high school district playoff.
Awesome.
Or well, I guess they finished first in district. He's a freshman, and they got a first round bye and lost in the second round, but had a great experience with high school soccer this year with him. And then the youngers, man, we're just in and out of basketball, soccer. It's wild and crazy, but it's a ton of fun, and we're enjoying. We'll talk a little bit about it today, but what is our role as parents with that? But not to dive too early. Man, how are things with the Darke family? What's going on out there in California?
And it's good stuff, dude. Speaking of playoffs, we are getting ready actually today as we record. So when this releases, we will know the results. But we have a semifinal match tonight.
Nice.
And it goes to show how strong our league is, that we came in 7th in our league. And we are now in the semifinals, and 4 of our league teams, the 6th place team, the 7th place team, the 1st place team, and the 2nd place team are still in the playoffs.
Wow.
So that's how strong the league is. It's a lot of fun. The girls, it's as much of a team as I've ever coached. There's not
awesome.
one special player who's just taken over the game, and that often happens in high school.
Yeah.
You get one player who just dribbles and scores, and then that team wins a lot. When we have 3 girls with 5 goals or more, the leading scorer has 8, and the next leading is 5, and everyone's getting assists, everyone's participating. I just love this team. We had another spaghetti feed last night at our house. That's what it's about. I looked at my son and my 13-year-old, and I said, these girls will remember this dinner more than they'll remember most of the games they've ever played.
Yeah. And
that's what I love about this team. They all planned it themselves. They did it themselves. They figured out the food themselves. And it's just, that's what we're trying to foster, and to see it actually come to fruition. Another thing that was cool the other day at practice, the losing team of one of the games had to go move a goal, right? Well, the senior leaders said, you guys just go over there. We'll take care of it.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was like, totally on their own. And okay. This stuff's actually taking some they're taking some of it and putting it into practice. So it's pretty cool. It's been a really good year. Yeah. The family's doing well. We're just all over the place and doing some cool stuff. I love that my son's now coaching and loving it. Coaching high school so it's a lot of fun. My daughter's also on the team that's in the semifinals, so that's a good bonding for the family too, to get out there together. So and then it kind of goes into what we're talking about today, right? I mean, what you talked about, what I talked about. We just really wanted to have a conversation about priorities and the development of our players, of our children, whether it's our children or if we're coaching. How we can do that, or if you're just, someone who loves the game and wants to see it, as we talk about. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're one who who wants to use this sport for great human development things, right? For leadership, for life, for, future marriage, future parenting, future job skills. I've had multiple conversations this year with our players where they're saying, "Why'd you do this? Why why'd you have this decision? Why do you have a decision where if you don't show up at practice, it affects your playing time? I'm a starter and I'm needed." And it's like, look, if you just tell your boss someday, I don't feel like coming to work, that's going to have repercussions. It's going to have consequences. And so your future, your life is more important to us than one game in the big picture. And by doing that, you knew the rule, you knew the standard, and you actually impacted your team negatively because of that decision that you had. And so to actually have those conversations, and do we really, as a parent, do we agree with that? As a coach, what are the things? What are our priorities? And how are we as coaches, as parents, as players, doing the things we need to do, making the hard decisions we need to make in order to do that? And so, some of the things that prompted this conversation we'll get into today, but one of them was just me refereeing some games over the weekend and seeing that there were 10-year-old, 11-year-olds playing, and every game had two VO or trace cameras up. And I just couldn't help but thinking, like, what are they using this for? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what are they using? So that was just kind of one of the things that I brought up, to Paul, and we go, man, let's just get these conversations, because it's not just it's probably not the coaches making that decision. Even it's probably the parents saying we need this because they heard from somebody that they need video and this and that and the other thing. And so, we can go a lot of we could talk for hours and hours on this. As guest, there's no guest today. As audience, Paul and I could talk. I especially could talk for hours about it.
Yeah.
But Paul, as we just kind of get kicked off into it, it's something we could talk about for a long time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are being done poorly, but there's also things that are being done well. And so I'd like to hit on all of it. I don't just want to be a complaint session, but what do you think just in this idea? What are some of the things that really come to mind as you think about this topic?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, as we were just kind of talking through it a little bit, and as my brain was processing, I think where my mind goes to, I had a conversation actually last week. There's a family that's moving to our town from out of town where soccer is way more prominent than it is in Waco, Texas, and kind of asking my opinion and, where should my kid play? What school? What club? Blah, 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 blah. And my first question was like, well, tell me a little bit about your family and what are your family priorities?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as families, and Marcy and I deal with this too, every season, we're not going to do as much next season with our kids, and then, now we're overwhelmed again. And,
yeah.
But I think as a family, I think if we can get down to the core of, what are our core values as a family and what's going to be important to us and what are we going to protect as a family, I think that's where we all should start. Right. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about as we go through this discussion can filter through that and then look back and go, okay, then that's how I would make that decision based on my core values and what we're about as a family and what maybe my child has relayed that's pretty important to them based on their age as we're developing them into that. And I think that is what kind of this discussion is about. How are we developing our children through sport, right? To be men and women that can be successful in whatever it is God has for them down the road. And I do think it starts with core value, right? And as an individual and as a family. And so that's where my mind goes to start. And I think that's an important question to ask each of us as we're going into making decisions, even if it's, from our side, like, hey, we have 4 boys, all very active, how many sports can they do every season? That doesn't just run us crazy to where we don't even have dinner together, anymore. Or, so what is really important for us as a family? And then that kind of can dictate, the decisions we make, whether it's, things we might talk about as, club travel, at what age or to what degree, the cameras at 10-year-old games, college students trying to take control of teams, whatever the thing may be. I think core value comes into play. I mean, and that's just kind of come to mind. Not even something we talked about before the call, but what is your, how do you take that? How would you respond to that?
I love that. And I think that's so true. And I think it's something that some people do unintentionally and some people do very intentionally. I think the people that do it unintentionally tend to get caught up in the hype and tend to get caught up in what everyone else is doing and what everyone else is saying they need to do. Right.
Yeah.
And so it reminds me of Romans 12 too, right? Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, right? The renewal of your mind happens through the Holy Spirit and all this stuff, right? So that's a whole, that's a conversation for a different podcast, right? But I think that idea of if you aren't really intentional to create these values as if you're married with your spouse, or if you're a single parent, to be able to know and be able to say, to your children, this is why we do what we do, right? It's why we ask that question all the time. What is your why? What is your purpose? Why do you do what you do? And how does it affect how how do you live it out daily, right? So what is the why of sports for your family, right? Now, very few people go into sports at age 4 years old and say, the why of playing sports for my child is to get a college scholarship. If you do, let's have a conversation, and that's kind of messed up, right? But very few people do that. But as you kind of slowly are that frog in the water, it starts becoming that, so that you have 10-year-olds having cameras on the sideline because they think they need to start making their videotape or something, or they have to be watching film and doing this and this and this. Chances are those videos just go into some universe and people are just paying money. They're in some server in New Mexico. But for my family, this is something we've always talked about, family dinners, so critical. We're going to support each other, right? The parents, some parents, I go to every game of all my kids. 5 kids, it's not just logistically possible. But we also told our kids there will be some weekends we send you with somebody because we just want to have a Sabbath rest, or we just want to, mom and I want to go on a date or something, whatever it is. Like, look, this is not going to revolve around that. But it's got to be so intentional, or else you will be conformed to this craziness and this chaos that youth sports has become. And, we just had Don Williams on, and he talks a lot about these things. That this is a guy whose job literally is to recruit people to go to school, to go to college. And he'll be the first to say, hey, it can't be about that. If it's about that, you're going to burn out. If it's about that, you're going to miss the forest for the trees. If it's about that, you're not going to find the right fit. You're going to be having to go to this. If you're the type of person who's, when they're 4 or 5 years old, saying, I got to get my kid into school, chances are you're probably not listening to this. But also, it can't just be I'm just going to kind of go along with it and go with the flow. It's got to be we have to develop our values. We have to develop our priorities, and we need to explicitly state them as a family. So, when we make a certain decision, when we say you can't go to a tournament, or we say, do you really want to go to this tournament? Does this tournament make sense to go to? That you're on the same page together and it's not a fight every time.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a conversation that I've had recently, and I may have shared it on here before. I can't remember, but it was a very impactful conversation for me. In our community, we had a family I love. They've got kids that are a little bit younger than, maybe at the tail end of my kids and younger. And they were saying, hey, we love the school that your kids go to. A lot of our friends go there. But we're just not sure we want to put our kids in the school, but we just can't make the decision. And I'm like, well, what's kind of leading your thing? Like, well, if they're going to be college athletes, we think it's probably better for them to be in the public school, high school system. And I was like, wait, I said that never crossed our mind when it came to what school our children were going to go to, was the athletics, because even though we are a sport family, I mean, none of my kids may play college athletics. They might, I don't know. But the reality was like, what is if the public school is the best place for my children to be in our community for their growth and whatever, then absolutely do it. And all of my kids are different and need different things and whatnot. But I just kind of told the guy, I said, hey, listen, sports never crossed my mind when it came to the place where my kids needed to be for school. Now, will that change maybe for one of my kids as they get older and start to enter high school and they've got some opportunities or whatever? Maybe it will. But at the initial, when they're really young, that had nothing to do with it because it really didn't fit the values of what was right for our family. Now, he's not wrong, right? If that's the value, but I have a hard time putting value in, my 5-year-old, starting to promote them in the public school system or whatever school, or even the private school system, if that ends up being the best thing, because that's the best way to get them into college sports.
Right.
I mean, I hate to say it, but in, 15 years, when that kid's going to college, the college sport landscape will probably look totally different than it does now, because it looked totally different than 15 years ago. So
yeah,
I think those are things that, as families, when you say, okay, what really are the priorities here? I don't think college athletics should be, a family's priority at the youth age, for sure. Now, it may grow and develop into that. Hey, my kid's very good, they're talented, they've got these special gifts and abilities that God's given them in sport. Then we may need to start looking at other things. I've talked to another family recently. It's funny, they have 5 children. The youngest kid is about to enter high school, and he's the only one they've really had time to put a lot of effort into sport into, and he's progressing to be a great athlete. So, like, we've had 4 other children, but we've never navigated this process before. What do we do? But their family priorities change, right? Like me and you, we want family time together. We want Sabbath weekends. Sometimes we can't go to every event, but we'd love to. But then you get to the last kid, and it's like, we've got all this time, so now our family priorities are different. So as your personal priorities change based on your life circumstances and what's going on, so do your family's life purposes and challenges change as well. So being able to adapt to what's going on is going to be important too. So laying a base foundation for what are your family priorities, but also knowing to reevaluate those, whether it's every 6 months to a year, to say, okay, where are we now, and reevaluate that. And not just adopting some other family's values, not adopting your parents' family values, but what are your family values? So that's where I go with that. I think I went on a tyrant there for a second, but I think that gives us a good base for some of the things that, if we want to get more specific on some different things. The camera specifically, hey, the cool thing about the cameras, if there is a cool thing about it, is that I remember when I was a kid, my mom wanted to use a little camcorder.
Yeah.
To record it. I mean, we had an entire game where she recorded the bench and not the game, because she thought it was on when it was off. So she'd pick it up from the bench and turn it off and miss the entire game. Right.
Yeah.
So if it's for, hey, like for longevity, I want videos of my kids, and hey, we've got this system that can record all the games for you guys to have digitally in your photos and all that. That's really cool. Right. I don't think that's what it's for.
Right.
But if that's it, awesome. That we just streamline this is great. But if you're doing video it better not be for college, because no college coach is even looking at your 12-year-old video. I can just tell you that from experience. But even if it's evaluating film, from a coach's perspective, how the families utilize that and how the coaches utilize it is, I don't know if it's necessary at that age or not. It probably isn't. But I would also say it shouldn't be an arms race either. It shouldn't be, well, that club is using video for their 10-year-olds, so that must be a better club. So if my club's not using video for 10-year-olds, and I probably should go to this other club because they seem really invested in the youth. Well, scratch that out. What's the character of the coach for my 10-year-olds? Right. That's what I care most about. I don't care if they've got a camera. I don't care if they have Nike jerseys, That's
right.
Anyway, that's where I go with the film, and you experienced it. So I'm coming off of but when you're out there and you're reffing, at what point did you realize they were doing it, and what were kind of your thoughts going through your head as you're experiencing that?
I want to touch on a lot of things you talked about, but honestly, it was like, what is going on? And so I tried to there was the temperature, is rising. It's a cauldron out there with these kids. As a referee, you hear all of it from both sides, from the parents, from the coaches, everything. And fortunately, I don't really buy into it. And so, a dad's yelling at me of how I need to call it both ways, or you're terrible, or whatever, or, and fortunately I didn't get much of that in this one, but it was pretty mellow for all intents and purposes. One of them, we had a young ref, and she didn't do, it was one of those goal line calls, and the coach was like, why did it take so long to decide? I'm like, because the girl didn't know to walk back to midfield. I needed to make sure it was a goal. I wanted to make sure we got the right decision before I blew the whistle. And she's like, okay, that's good. You just kind of bring down the temperature. But a lot of I bring that up because it's indicative to this temperature is rising, and everyone's so stressed, and everyone's so, I got to do this, 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 I got to do this. And just bring it down a level, because here's the thing. we have 5 kids, obviously. All my kids, except for my middle, played soccer at a high level. Ironically, my middle child who didn't play soccer at a high level is now involved in a boys. She's got a boyfriend whose brother is a professional soccer player in Norway. And so I thought that was pretty funty that she can, and they're big Manchester United fans as a family. And I'm just like, it's just funny to me. But and then all that to say, but my son, who I said was coaching, like he was one of those kids who really wanted to play in college, was going after it, and that's awesome. He was going after it. We fully supported him, but again, it was, we didn't send him off to some academy somewhere because, whatever. And it's like, no, we're gonna keep with this club and stay here, and that's awesome. That you can keep playing, but then COVID hit, right? Well, first of all, he got a knee injury, tore his meniscus. COVID hit his junior year and senior year. COVID was gone, so no more recruiting, right? Like basically, if he weren't recruited before then, and he had his knee injury his sophomore year, so it's like, then what?
Yeah,
then he still went to junior college, played, and then went to Biola and played there, but it didn't go quite as well, and then he got a concussion, and soccer's over. And even when it wasn't going as well, one of the things I was most proud about him is because we had these conversations throughout the whole process that it's you can love this game and you can play this game, but it can't be about the game, right? Like at some point the game's going to be over.
Yeah.
Right. Even the great Paul Jobson, soccer, no longer was coaching soccer.
Yeah.
But like at some point you need to realize that you're not going to be playing anymore. And especially at the really high competitive level. Then what? Right. So, but I remember he told me after a one-on-one with his coach, he said, because he wasn't playing like he thought he should be playing. And like I thought he should be playing, quite frankly, but I'm not the coach and I wasn't making those decisions. So he called me. He's like, I'm so frustrated. I'm like, so what's the next step? He's like, I don't know. I go, why don't you talk to the coach? Find out what's going on. Right. So he did all that. The coach said this, this, and this. And he just, and Drew said to the coach at one point, he said, I'm just grateful that soccer's not everything to me, because I'd be crushed right now. He said, this is the coach.
Yeah.
Like, but I can still be able to lead from the bench. I can still be able to, have these great relationships with my friends, and I'll still give everything I have, and I still want to prove to you that I should be on that field more than I already am. And I've never been prouder.
Sure.
As a dad, right? Like he could have had a hat trick every game, and I wouldn't have been more proud.
Yep.
And so those are the types of things that I look at and I go, okay, how do we instill these values into our kids rather than what I see as a coach and what we talked about a little bit? A lot of times kids are burning out because there's so much pressure on them, and they're going to all these tournaments, and they're flying across the country to play games, and there's pressure on them. If they don't go, the coaches are guilt tripping them to, if either the family says we can't go or the kid says, hey, look, I just want a break, then you're getting guilt tripped, right? Or worse, you're like, well, you got off the team then, or whatever, and you see that. And then the other thing is, I see, kids when they're not playing, they're trying to burn programs down on the way out, right? Like they're seniors, and I just saw this in another school recently that senior girls, on the way out, trying to get a coach fired because either they didn't like something about it, right? And that happened at our high school. It happened with me and the head coach, right? There were some girls that didn't like the way, whether it was playing time, whether it was the way the coach coached or whatever. But, and then, so again, it goes to the values of that. In order to do that, there has to be something being said or done somewhere else. And I'm not saying it's from the parents necessarily. It could just be from friends, or it could be from their coach. It could be from social media. It could be from a lot of stuff. Right? Because there's some high profile things happened at Cal. And I don't know the details of these situations. I mean, there could absolutely be situations where it's totally justified. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist. But the magnitude of it happening in some of these specific instances that I know it's happened, I know that's not always the case. So I think it does go back to the values, and it does go back not just the values, but where do we put soccer or whatever sport, name the sport, in our not only priority but value, and where does it stand on our importance in life, right? Like what is the purpose of this game? Is it to create our identity? We go back to Graham Daniels and achieved identity versus received identity, right? If we're scared to survive, all this, we have to have videos. And if we don't play, then our entire identity is shattered, right? We are crushed. The reality is there will always be someone better at everything you do. There will always be someone better. You win the national championship, next year you're probably not going to win it. There's going to be someone better. So if your identity is based on that, if your value is based on that, it will come crashing down at some point. And that's the reality. You're the best on your high school team or on your club team. You go to college, you won't be the best anymore. I saw that. I went to Vanderbilt Law School. Everyone there got the best grades. Everyone there had a great LSAT score. And we get there and people got C's and they were crushed.
Yeah.
Never had a C in their life. Right? What do you do with that? So anyway, those are all things that I think it does go to the value. It does go to, how you are approaching the game as a parent, as a coach, as a player. All of that needs to be coming together. So as a player, if your parents are going crazy and you're not wanting to, you need to speak up. As a parent, if you're ask the question of your kid, do you even want to play? Do you really love this game? If you see your kid going to practice, coming home and never touching a ball otherwise, chances are they don't really love the game. Right? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong there. I know the kids that love the game. You can't keep them out of the park, and there's a happy medium, right? Or at least being active outside. But, are they just hating going to practice? Are they hating going to, is it something that you have to drag them out the door to get there, to get ready for, practice, whatever. So anyway, what are your thoughts on all that?
Gauging the temperature of your child. They may say they love the sport,
right?
But that may not mean that they want to be a college soccer player.
Yeah.
They may just love being on their recreation team and being with their friends. That's loving soccer to them. Whereas in my mind as a parent, loving soccer means, well, get out and train every day. If you love the game, what is your child's love for the game? Because I think I've said this before on some previous podcasts. I had a number of players throughout my career that at some point during their career, usually pretty early on, they realized they've been playing the game because their parents loved them playing the game, not because they even loved it. I'm like, hey, what's kind of your purpose? I'm like, I think I've just been playing because my parents really want me to play. I don't really even love soccer. I think I'm out, and as sad as a moment that is, it's also an amazing moment for that still, child adult transition to say, that's awesome. You just found that that's not all you're about. Now you can realize that, at some point, like you said, at some point your career will be over at some point. Whether it's in high school, junior high, college, pro, at some point your career is over. But if that's all your identity is wrapped up in, that's a problem. So I think as a parent and as a coach, identifying what is that, what does love of the game really mean for that person? I have people that I'll talk to that they absolutely love soccer, but they just love watching the game, right? They've not been much of an athlete at all, but they love soccer, but that doesn't mean they should be out training. Right. So I think that's an important piece too of we navigate that as you and I both are, as our children transition from phase to phase. And like you said, at every level, everybody gets better. The best all arrive at the next level, and then the best go to the next, and the best from the other areas arrive at the next level. And you challenge yourself, and a kid is going to love it to a point where they've met the greatest challenge they ever want to meet, and they can just settle into where they feel like they need to be to still love the game. But at the end of the day, someone told me the other day, and this isn't a new concept, but it wasn't, fresh in my mind. So they just reminded me, and it was like, hey, listen, sport isn't about going to college. It's not about playing professionally. It's about what are the lessons that sport actually teaches us about life? What are the life lessons? I mean, this podcast, how does soccer explain leadership? It's not, soccer is the greatest thing ever, but how can we learn leadership lessons through a sport? How do we learn about relationship? How do we learn about, all these different things that are way more important than, winning a game, right? And all the experts will tell you, I learned more from losing than I did from winning. Well, why are we striving so hard to win? We should be striving to lose, right? We should be striving to lose if that's where we learn our greatest lessons. I know it sounds stupid, but I think you know what I mean. It's like,
I got you.
Let's put my kid in this situation where he's always the best. He's always the best player. Our team went undefeated for 2 seasons. I'm like, that's awful. Those kids need to learn to lose, because what happens when they lose for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, they're going to be done with that sport. Yeah. They're awful all of a sudden. So how are we pushing ourselves to a point where we lose? We're okay with losing. You learn from it. You're trying to win, but it's not all about winning. So, but I think that's I don't know. I kind of like that. I like the idea of like, we should all be trying to lose. I kind of like that. I might put that on a t-shirt. We should all be trying to lose, not to be a loser, but to be a winner. We should all be trying to lose.
I like that. I don't like that tonight necessarily with the semifinals for CIF, but during the season, I can tell you, we lost 6 games, and all of them hurt, and all of them had lessons, and the girls learned from all of them, and we had great conversations out of all of them.
That's where your wins come from. Your wins come from the loss.
That's exactly right. And you see the team we played in the quarterfinals had lost 1 game all year, and they were the number 1 team in Northern California and all this stuff. They had no idea what to do when they got behind.
Yeah.
They had no idea what to do. Whereas in the first round, we were down 1-0 at half on a fluke goal. We came back and boom, boom, hit 2 goals, 1-2-1, because we'd have been in that situation before. We knew what to do. And again, that from a soccer standpoint, it works, but also from a life standpoint, it works. What do you do when you're knocked down? What do you do when you have a problem? What do you do when you have, issues? You're seeing, right now, not to get political, but you're seeing people freak out because somebody's asking them to name 5 things they did last week at work. A little tiny, tiny, tiny bit of accountability. People have no idea what to do with it. Yeah. Right. And that goes for this too. It's like you get down a little bit. You have a coach give you some criticism. You have, some people that are going, and you're like, what? I'm not starting all the time. I'm not playing all the time. I have to actually work harder. What do I do? Right. Sports is a great testing ground for all this stuff, right? Because if you don't show up every day, and you're not going to play. If you don't show up and give it everything you got, you're going to be accountable. But, with that, I think there's the flip side of it, right? There's losing, there's all that stuff, but there's also the lessons you're learning and the camaraderie that comes with a team that often is missed when you're focusing just on self, which when you have a video camera up there, when you have, college as your driver, when you have a showcase and you're going there and it's not even a tournament anymore with a, a final and winning and, all this stuff and I'm not saying that but if you go to a showcase and the point is to be seen by a college coach, that puts focus on me, right? Whereas another one of my proudest moments as a coach this year was during senior night. One of the seniors who's played maybe a total of a half this whole year, and her highlight from soccer says, "What is your highlight of playing soccer?" Maybe it was high school soccer, and she said, "Being on this team this year." I was like, that is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome because she gets it. It's like, and the last night, the team dinner, we have girls who are hurt. We have girls who aren't able to play right now for different reasons. And they were all there. And it was like, this is awesome.
Yeah. This
is what it's about. And I think that gets missed so much when these teams, even the teams going to these places all around the country. And that's something we also, because that goes into all this. Why are we traveling across? We talked this with Don Williams too. Why are we traveling across the country? Why are we going to places like Las Vegas with teams? Why are we going to places like, St. Louis in December when it's frostbite warnings? Why are we going to, whatever, name the place? Why is a team from Massachusetts flying out to San Diego for a tournament in the summer? Why are we doing this? As you talked about, even with Waco, why are you driving every other weekend to Dallas or Austin or Houston or whatever, to play games? Like, these are things that I'm not saying you don't if you live in a remote location, but again, make sure that there's reasons for it. But typically when you get there, like you're not even doing team dinners. Sometimes people do, but a lot of teams just, you go play the game and then you go off and do your own thing. And some people get together and some people don't, whatever. But what are we teaching about team? What are we teaching about self? Because we're such an individualistic culture that it's about me. It's about me. How can I get what I deserve, quote unquote? What can I get And so when you're the best on your team and you're hearing everyone tell you that you deserve to get a D1 scholarship, and those people have no idea what they're talking about because D1 scholarships are so few and far between for a freshman especially. And in this new world, it's even crazier and harder. But it goes back to what Don said, the questions he gets, or the coaches get is, how much are you going to pay me?
Yep.
And that's what happens. And then it feeds down to the high school coaches. Hey, coach, I'm the best. So why aren't you playing me? I can't. We had a dad who once came up to us and said, my daughter can't make any practices, but she still wants to play high school. She's got to train for her club team. And we said, no, it's not the way it works. She's a great player.
Yeah.
She just, played at Portland and went to Kentucky and played. She's a great player.
Yeah.
We said, that's not the way it works. And he's like, well, all right, then we got to work something out. I go, yeah. I mean, she's got to come to practice. That's how we work it out. She's part of the team or she's not.
Right.
She has to miss a practice here or there. We get that. But so anyway, yeah. So what we kind of, what's that bring to mind?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I want to dive into the travel piece of it a little bit. And of course, everything, that we're talking about here, there's so many different ways to think through things. Age determines things. Phil, you brought up, because we were talking about before we started the podcast about, being in Waco, and it's not a great soccer. There are a lot of great soccer people here. We just can't all get on the same page. That's a soapbox for a different podcast, but but we've got coaches here that have club teams, and we've got 8, 9, 10-year-olds whose families are driving to Dallas to play in a league in Arlington for those age groups, and they're having to go every other weekend. They play 2 games to do that. When I'm like, listen, at that age, they need to be driving. Families don't need to commit that amount of time on a Saturday or Sunday every other week. We should be able to do that locally here, and those are things we're trying to build and drive. But things like that now listen, when kids are older and if there's not an opportunity for challenging competition in the local area because there aren't enough older kids still playing, and that's a problem too. Or, hey, yeah, you know what? If your kid's going to play, 14 years old or 15-year-old select team in Waco, yeah, you're going to have to drive to compete in a league somewhere else. It's just the way it's going to have to be.
Yeah.
But, by that point, you've kind of figured out, what are your priorities for things. But then when it comes to, team travel, select team travel overall at the higher levels, I just, some people would argue, Phil, that traveling as a team is team bonding, right? They would say, well, we actually bond as a group because we do travel so much together, and the kids all stay together in a room together. I don't really think that's a necessity at that level. I think that's that's extremism. Of like, yeah, we're really tight because we travel all the time together. You don't need that,
Right.
I remember, I'm turning into the old guy that started to talk about, but back in my day, when it was just U.S. youth soccer, and I grew up in Georgia, you played all the teams in your state, you won your state, you went to regionals, you won regionals, and you went to nationals, if you were fortunate enough to do that. But most of the travel was pretty local, pretty regional, very doable for a family. And I wasn't a kid that later in my high school years did drive an hour and a half to practice at least 2 or 3 times a week because I wanted to be on the best team because I was at that point trying to play in college, right? And we're talking about 16, 17, 18 years old. But younger than that, no, I played in my little local town until I was, I think it was 16. But, now it's, I want to be, in the Dallas Metroplex, there's 6 of the best clubs in the country, in the women's game especially, in the Dallas Metroplex. I've got people they could club hop from club to club and never move and never drive a greater distance to go to another great club. It's that saturated with talent and great clubs. But all of those clubs are flying every other weekend somewhere else, sometimes going to tournaments where they'll fly to California or wherever and play each other at these tournaments. And it's like, what are we doing? Totally. And these aren't tournaments like when we grew up, tournaments where you went to, I did a lot of tournaments in Florida because it was convenient, but you'd play a lot of other teams. You hardly ever saw another team from, you'd play, year over year at these different tournaments. But if we ever did go to a tournament, like I remember we went to a tournament in Texas one time, there were no Georgia teams at that tournament, but there were some teams from California and Arizona, and it was so cool as a kid. But now we got teams traveling thousands of miles and playing the same exact teams they play,
That's right.
Every weekend. And, I don't see the necessity to it. I think we can sell an advantage to it. And I love some of the people that run some of these organizations. I know them personally. But I don't know if it's a necessity. I really don't. But I think that, we are, I even look at some of the professional players now who start to complain about how many games they're having to play. Right. And now we're putting this on our youth, our youth system. We're overstraining the amount of games that kids are playing. And then let's talk about kids that play that are multi-sport, right? Or they're playing like the kid you just mentioned, who's obviously a high level athlete, who is a great player across the board, but was not only wanted to play high school, but wanted to play club. And where's the give? And we talked about that a lot. Some of the programs that I've put together is, listen, we got to watch the load on these kids, whether we like it or not, whatever side you're on, the high school side or the club side, what's the best thing for the kid? Now, let's take that back. Coaches have to be cognizant of that, but so do parents. Parents need to be cognizant of that too. And again, realizing that, again, another story here locally, we have a young girl that we've worked with. She was 13, 14 years old, and she was going back and forth to Dallas to train. And it got a little tough on the family because they have multiple children, and she's doing some training in Waco, but also supplementing in Waco with the training in Dallas. And the club coach in Dallas said, "Hey, listen, if you can't make it to more practices here, you'll never be able to play in college." So the dad called me and I said, leave.
Yeah, 100%.
Leave. The crazy thing is this father was a coach in a different sport and said, "Hey, take your daddy hat off, put your coaching hat on. You say that to a child. What do you think?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, never mind." It's just ridiculous, the pressure that we're putting on parents and families. So I think it's important. And I think things like this, where we're able to help from our expertise, in certain areas, and I'm completely dumb to a lot of things, but I do think this is an area that I think you and I really do understand. Hopefully this is helpful for some parents to help navigate and for us to be some resources. I know in our community, Marcy and I are resources to families that are trying to navigate some of these things. And, in our community, sometimes it means kids aren't even playing soccer anymore because it just doesn't make sense. And I hate seeing that, but we're not giving them really any other alternative. And I do think as a sport, I think we will start to lose some of the better athletes because of that. And especially on the men's side, where there's not the collegiate opportunity as much, we'll start to lose some of the great athletes because we're putting too big of a strain on that piece of it.
Absolutely. And I just watched the Pulisic documentary, right? And so you have this one kid who not only the things that had to line up for him to be Christian Pulisic that we all know and talk about, and he has a documentary about, like the fact that his grandpa's Croatian allowed him to play in Germany. But he also had to have, his parents made a decision where his dad went with him to Germany to be there. And that was, I know parents, Folsom football is massive, it's like Texas football, and people move here for it. And so you get quarterbacks that go there, and there's 4 quarterbacks vying for one position. So the quarterback who's really good doesn't play, and his parents have to then decide, well, do we quote unquote separate for a year and I'll go move to a different place so he can play at a different school? And it's like, again, I'm not going to make decisions for families, but those are the types of things that, happen. Becca and I would never even have that conversation.
Yeah.
Both of us played in college. She was way better than I was, the 4-year starter or whatever, it's similar to your household. Your wife was a little bit better than you. And Becca was a lot better than me. But the point is, it's like we've said, no, if our kids are good enough, they're going to end up where they're supposed to be, and they're going to be playing somewhere, even if they walk on somewhere, that's fine, whatever. But the reality is, if everything we're saying is we're going to sell out everything for soccer, even for all our kids or for one kid, what message does that send to them, right? So at the end of the day, that's kind of the big overarching thing of this is, what message are we sending to our kids as coaches, as parents, that, whether it's, if you don't like the way your coach is coaching you, you need to go to the administration and complain about, find some things that they're doing wrong. The reality is everyone's doing things wrong.
Yeah.
You could find something with every single coach in the country. And if the administration isn't going to be strong and back the coach, they're going to get fired. So what, are you going to coach your kids to ruin people's lives because you don't like a decision they made? Or are you going to teach them to reconcile? Are you going to teach them to say, you know what, I don't agree with some of these decisions, but I'm going to either play harder or I'm going to go harder or I'm going to go talk to the coach and find out what's going on. And I'm not saying, because we've had players every practice come up and say, what more can I do? 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 And we're telling them the same thing every time. Just keep doing what you're doing. A lot of the time is the answer. It's just there's better players in front of you. So keep doing what you're doing and be better, at the end of the day. And then, and if they're being taught at home, well, I don't like that answer. Now you need to go tell the coach that he's wrong. And if he doesn't listen, then go to the administrator. We have parents who come to us and say, we've gone and talked to the administrator. And we're like, okay, what'd you tell him? Because he's telling us we have this kid in the wrong position. And we're like, well, we disagree, and end of conversation. Right. And by the way, she's killing it in the position she's playing. So we see a lot of it does come from the parents. And I'm not like going, oh, I'm such a great parent. I mean, I mess up all the time. Don't get me wrong. My kids will vouch for that, as much as anyone. Becca will vouch for that with me for sure. But you need to make sure you're on the same page. And you make sure that the lessons you want to be teaching, you're teaching. I think that's really the bottom line of what we're talking about here. And it needs to be consistent across the board. So when I talk to my daughter about, hey, you know what, it's not going to work out for you to go play in this tournament because dad's got to work and I have a trip and your mom needs to be home with Justin and we're not going to be doing this stuff. She understands. Like, okay. And actually, she was like, yeah, I mean, you know what? Like, I get it. I fully get it. And she was kind of expecting it because she knew.
Yeah.
And that's fine because we don't want our kids traveling halfway across the country with, not that we don't trust these people, but these are the things that are the most valuable to me. Would I let someone even borrow my car to take halfway across the country? Most people would be like, no, I wouldn't do that. It's my new car.
Yep.
But you're going to send your daughter with somebody halfway across the country? I mean, I don't know, and I'm not saying they're wrong or whatever, but just be thinking about these things. And make sure it's consistent because your kids are watching. As a coach, the kids are watching. If you're not consistent, if you have one rule for the best player and another rule for the not so great players, coach, the players are watching.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Parent, if you have one rule for one kid and then a different rule for another kid, kids are watching. So that's something that I just say, parenting tip, coaching tip, but also just life, like life as bosses. It's, there's going to be bosses you don't agree with. I guarantee it. I had several of them. And I went and had conversations with them. I remember vividly, I knew my values. I was an attorney, and one of the partners, I can close my eyes and remember The Office. Downtown Atlanta. By the way, I went to Atlanta when I was 10. So I don't want people to go, oh, you went on a trip. We won state cup. We didn't have a regional tournament in the Southwest. And the Southeast region invited us to come play at Oglethorpe University there in Atlanta. And that was a special trip. And we did go as a team and we did everything together as a team. And it was amazing. And I'll never forget. I remember going to the not Piggly Wiggly. It was one of those. It was a mini mart and getting candy as kids. We did that, right when we flew in. I gotta remember those things. That's awesome. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying if it's a special thing, like I remember it. If I did it every week, it'd be like, okay, that's not special anymore. But we forgot where I was going. What was
you were in that office talking.
Yes, I was in the office. So I was talking to the boss. First job I ever had as an attorney, and my wife and I had just had our oldest, our first child. And they had said that they wanted me to go to Connecticut for some document review. And for those of you who don't know, Atlanta and Connecticut are not very close together.
Right.
And I just had my baby and I said, sorry, I can't. And they said, well, we need you to do a lot of things. We need you to bill all these hours. We need you to do all this stuff. so that we can pay the partners what we pay the partners. And at least they were honest, right? Yeah. And I said, well, thank you for making it clear that this is not the place for me. I actually said that to him. I was probably a dumb young kid, but at the same time, my wife and I knew what our values were. We knew it was important to us. But if they didn't value that with me, then I needed to. But it wasn't like, oh, you need to change who you are as a firm. Well, I'm going to get you fired. I'm going to go talk to somebody else above you. Is like, no, you know what? This is not and that's fine. But it's kind of the flip side of it too. There will be clubs that say things to you like, well, if you can't come to this tournament, you're off the team. Okay, thank you. You've made it clear to me.
Yeah. You know I think let's take maybe this last little thing here.
Yeah.
And I do want to dive into, kind of how what is the best way to help your kid communicate with the coach at different ages and stages, right? Because what that looks like at the youth level is different than what it should look like at the college level. And I'll tell you, I was blessed. Marcy and I were both blessed during our career to have administrations that supported us, to the end. We never had to worry about, we always knew that if a student went or a parent went to an administrator, we would know about it right away. And I handled it the same way when I would have parents call me and say, hey, my child will kill me if she knew I was calling you. I said, well, the first thing I'm going to do when we hang up is I'm going to call your daughter. Right? The administrator should do the same thing. Absolutely. Hey, unless it's an egregious complaint, right? I'm not talking about the safety of your children and things like that. Like we're talking about variants, but if it's about playing time or it's about, whatever is, not really an administrator. Most administrators don't even care, to be quite honest with you. That the administrator should be saying, hey, have you talked to the coach? Mm-hmm. Right? But the parent should be saying to their child collegiately, hey, have you talked to the coach even about your complaints? As a parent, let me just give some advice to college parents. Your job as a college parent is to help your child transition from childhood to adulthood. That's what college is for. Okay? I don't care what degree they're going to get. It's great, but it's about transition to adulthood. Allow them to do that. You've got to let go of their hand a little bit. If they want to call you and vent to you, please be that sounding board. Please be someone who gives them sound advice and gives them wisdom behind the scenes. But do not run into a problem for them and try to solve it. This is a safe place for them to learn to solve problems. Get out of the way. Okay? There's my solid advice. Now, let's back up. Let's get a little bit younger. Let's go to the high school age. I do think that high school students are fully capable of communicating with coaches and should. Because think about it, in a year or two, they're going to be in college, whether they're an athlete or not, they've got to communicate with professors. They've got to start running their lives. So how early can we set them up? Let's remember, it wasn't that long ago that 12-year-old boys were running farmland. Okay.
That's
so, so we're not that far removed.
We're running ships in the Navy at 13.
Yeah, exactly. So we are capable at younger ages if we set our children up to do that. So I do think that high school kids can talk to coaches. Now, let's say it's 8th grade, 9th grade, and your kid isn't quite, every kid develops differently, right? Can you go in with your child and help facilitate that conversation? Hey, you know what? I understand what you're talking about. Why don't we go together and talk to your coach together? Now, one, you'll probably be way more calm in front of the coach in front of your child than you would without your child there. So that's lesson number one for the parent.
So, yeah.
But also for your child to see, okay, what does communication with an adult look like? Right? What is it? What's the saying? Tell them, show them, and then let them do it. It's that idea, right?
Yeah.
And as younger ages, bring your kids into those conversations at the youth level. Hey, hey, call your coach. My kids, and again, I'm not perfect. I don't get everything right. But when my kids don't want to go to practice, I say, well, you need to call your coach. Okay. Mm-hmm. My kids are 8, 11, and 13, and 15. But the younger ones, when they're young, hey, you're going to call coach and tell them you can't come to practice. If it's just because they don't feel like it, which we're going anyway, but they're going to call. If they're sick, for legitimate reasons, hey, we're not going to be in town for practice. You need to call coach, tell them you're not going to be there.
Yep.
Okay. Those are easy conversations. So that when they're led up to have a tough conversation, hey, coach, I've been at every practice. I'm not playing. Why? Okay. Now we can have that conversation. So I think for parents, I think it's, just some encouragement to say, hey, walk your kids through those things early so that when they get to college, they're not relying on you to continue to solve their problems, because at that point you shouldn't be. And let's say they're not an athlete. You're going to have problems with professors. You're going to have problems with other organizations that they're a part of. And are you going to call the president of the university or the dean of students every time there's a problem? No, you shouldn't. Okay. Is there a point where you should? Probably, in the extreme cases, right? When things can't get to a point. But, I want to touch on that a little bit because we kind of talked around some of it. I think without
That's awesome.
some actionable things, I think it becomes less important. So let's just say, hey, I think that's a great guideline. I'm not right about everything. I do think there's a lot of fluctuation. Every circumstance has its own, pluses and minuses to it. So this is a generalization of all of that. But overall, I would just say, hey, at the appropriate age, listen, walk your kids through what it looks like to have, important conversations with leaders of their organization. As a kid, the leader of their organization is a teacher or a coach. As they grow up, their leader is their boss, right? And at some point, then hopefully they become a leader of something also, and then understand, because of their relationship with their leaders, they now understand what they liked and didn't like, pluses and minuses of now working with people that are looking up to them.
Yeah, that's so good, folks. Like, that is so good. And I will not add a lot to that, because there's not a lot to add to that. That's so good and it's concise. The one thing I will say is, also be thinking, as you're doing things in the younger years, how will this impact my relationship with my child?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
if you're going in and you're doing everything for your child, most children don't like that. They don't want you talking to their teacher. They don't want you talking to their coach. Kind of like Paul said, if my daughter knew that I was doing this, they'd kill me. Then don't do it.
Yep.
Because here's the thing. My kids, so blessed, so grateful that my older kids who are outside the house still call me. Now, typically when they're calling me, there's an issue, there's a problem, they need something. But they're calling me. I once was complaining to a friend about the fact that my kids only called me when they needed something. And my friend looked at me and he said, all I heard in that whole thing is, your kids still call you. Right?
Yeah.
Don't do things that will make your kid not want to call you and tell you things. Because if they think that they're going to tell you something, and then you're going to turn around and tell the person who harmed them and yell at them and tell them all the things they're doing wrong, they're not going to share stuff with you. You need to be a safe place for your child to come to, and then help your child navigate that situation. And the older they get, they need to do it on their own. I know there are situations. I've talked to bosses who have 26, 27-year-old working for them, and the parents call them. Don't be that parent. There are so many things wrong with that. We need to let our kids use this sport. It's such a safe place to learn these lessons. Now, neither of us are saying that there's an abusive situation and there's actual abuse going on, that you don't go to the right people and to the authorities. Absolutely.
Yep.
Most of the time that's not happening. There are instances where it is. If it's about missing whatever, my kid's like, I want to hang out with my friends and go to a sleepover tonight. I'm like, okay, call your coach and tell him.
Yeah.
You're a captain. I don't think that's going to go over very well. And now my 13-year-old is like, Dad, I have to go to practice tonight. I'm like, Justin, tonight's an exception, and I will let your coach know because your sister's playing in the semifinal game. Yeah. And you're going to go support your sister because this is a special time for our family. And if your coach doesn't understand that, that's fine. But there are times for that too, as parents. Yeah. That's okay too, when you have stuff in your family because again, it's just a game. And so all that to say, I think that's a good place to land. Any last second thoughts?
No, it's good. I think it's a good conversation, and just encourage folks to continue to have these types of conversations, with your leaders in your community, your coaches, your other families. And, none of us can do this by ourselves. And that's one thing that I love about our community here is that, and having community with you, Phil, and, I think we can't do any of this together, and none of us have it all figured out. And there's not one thing that I've said on this podcast today that is an original thought. It's all things that I'm learning. I'm getting older. I'm learning as I get older how much I really don't know about life. Back 15, 20 years ago, I thought I knew it all. Now I'm realizing how much I don't know. And I think as a community, that's where we can all come together and figure things out and do what's best for us and our family. And that's where I'll land. But I appreciate this community. I appreciate, Phil, you and your family in all things that we do behind the scenes as well. But again, we've got to all come together to make things best for the next group coming up behind us.
Absolutely. So good. Folks, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you want to just tell us how wrong we are, yes, or if you have other thoughts on this, we would love to share them. Whether it's in an episode or in our online community, whatever it may be. This is an important conversation, and we know we don't have all the answers. We know that we don't have, we're not right on everything, whatever. We're still learning, as Paul said. And so we'd love to learn from you as well. So please share that. Send us an email, comment on the different platforms that we're on. You can find all that on the show notes for this episode. If you want to learn more about Warrior Way, Paul mentioned that again. What they're doing in Waco is awesome. If Guatemala trips, other trips they're doing. If you want to learn more about that, you can check that out, warriorwaysoccer.com. That will be in the show notes. If you want to learn about whether it's coaching the bigger game or what Providence World's doing down in Honduras, you can do that in the show notes as well. And as always, we hope that you're taking what you're learning from this show and you're using it to be a better coach, a better parent, a better spouse, a better leader, better employee, right? Better in everything that you do. And you continually remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.